In the late 90s and early 2000s, there was this explosion of movies being made of beloved TV shows from the 60s. Some of these movies would go on to do really well. Matthew Lillard is now best known for his turn as Shaggy in the 2002 Scooby-Doo film, and the 1996 Mission Impossible movie would spawn a largely successful film franchise. But others did not do so well. Movies of Inspector Gadget and My Favorite Martian were largely panned by critics on account of being stupid, and some like the Brady Bunch movies seem to have all but been forgotten by now. Can you guess what side of things we'll be on today? Lost in Space is one of the movies of all time. The screenplay is absurd, the characters are thin as paper, the effects are aged at best, and the direction is largely uninteresting. By all objective measures, this is not a very good movie at all. I, however, love it. And this isn't a so bad it's good thing for me. My enjoyment of this movie is in spite of its flaws rather than because of them. Sure, I have a hearty chuckle at the very stupid dialogue that is prevalent across this movie, but I have fun with it every time I watch this movie. It was something my family would gather around to watch quite a lot as a kid, and I'll still put it on when I need a good time. I mean, of course, it still sucks on most objective levels, so I have to roast it for that, but goddamn, I love this movie.
However, before we discuss the movie further, a cheeky Patreon plug. The Michael and Lo-Fi Patreon will not only get you early access to my videos, but you will also get an inside look as to the process of making these videos. This includes clips from work in progress videos, stuff that doesn't make the cut of existing videos, audio bloopers, and even the notes I take when watching content for this channel. On top of all that, you'll be able to lodge video requests, so if there's something you'd like me to cover, you can tell me and I will put it on the list. There might also be polls for what you want me to do next. That seems like fun. So not only will you be getting all this, but you'll also be supporting this channel, for which I would be very grateful. So swing by my Patreon. It's a little sparse at the moment, but once I get into the swing of things over there, it'll be much more interesting, hopefully.
Originally, Lost in Space was a TV show that ran for 3 seasons on CBS from 1965 to 1968. It was pretty heavily inspired by the Swiss Family Robinson, following the crew of the spaceship Jupiter 2 as they get, well, lost in space. This crew largely consists of the Robinson family, the parents John and Maureen, and their children Judy, Penny, and Will. Also along for the ride is hotshot Major Don West, the ship's robot, an alien monkey named Debbie the Bloop, and the cartoonishly evil Dr. Zachary Smith. The first 2 seasons of the show largely took place on the surface of planets the Robinsons would get marooned on at the beginning of the season, whereas the 3rd season took a little bit more spacefaring in nature, more along the lines of Star Trek. It was a moderate hit on TV, but seems to be more fondly remembered through syndicated reruns, also much like Star Trek. The thing about Lost in Space is it should be the easiest thing in the world to make a movie adaptation of it. As far as science fiction TV goes, it is intensely safe, having none of the social and political commentary that Star Trek was famous for. The characters fit into pretty easily identifiable archetypes, so any writer worth their salt should be able to extrapolate them into well-rounded characters for a feature film. The concept is exceedingly simple and lends itself to endless interpretation in terms of swashbuckling sci-fi adventure. In fact, the more recent Netflix adaptation has, in my mind, proved that point in spades. It changes a lot from the source material, but the Robinson family is preserved and even improved on in places. I will be referring to the adaptation quite a bit, by the way, because it has plenty of examples as to what it gets right and what this movie gets so very wrong. So what went wrong with this movie exactly?
What the hell?
The biggest problem with this movie is that it doesn't seem to know what it wants to be. Parts of it seem to suggest going for a darker, grittier look at the universe of the Space Family Robinson, but the overwhelming majority of it is clearly written to be a cheesy romp. This screenplay was written by Akiva Goldsman. This is a man whose work is pretty prevalent in film and TV, most recently working on Strange New Worlds and Picard for Star Trek, but notably he wrote the screenplays for Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. I single these movies out specifically because it seems to paint a vivid picture of what it was Goldsman was going for in this screenplay: camp. The 60s Lost in Space show is cheesy. There's no way around that. But it's not a bug of the show, it's a feature. It's a fun, cheesy romp with a cute family and a hysterically over-the-top villain who just plain fucks up all the time. It's pretty apparent to me that this is the vibe that Goldsman was shooting for in the screenplay, much as he was with the camp of the Batman movies he wrote for. Now, we can argue about how successful the screenplay is in providing this fun romp in a moment, because when I break this movie down in greater detail, this will be brought up again. But overall, it's clear that this is what he was going for. The direction of the movie is another story. It seems to me that director Stephen Hopkins missed that this was supposed to be a bit of a silly movie, and as a result, the direction of this movie is completely straight-faced. More than that, it seems Hopkins was going for a dark and serious tone. Everything in this movie is washed out in greys and browns, looking a lot more like the grimdark comic book adaptations just around the corner that would accidentally be popularized by Batman Begins. The resulting tension between the visual tone of the movie and the tone prevalent on the screenplay means that this movie, to put it mildly, is a complete mess. What doesn't help is that Hopkins isn't even very good at directing it seriously. Outside of a couple of flourishes and cool shots, this movie is assembled in the most formulaic way possible, leaving very little to grab onto in terms of looking at this movie on a stylistic level. If this had been directed with a more colorful palette and a wink at the audience, I genuinely think more people would have loved this movie the way I do. But they didn't, so here we are. This also goes for the production design of the movie. Once again, so much of it is just the same bland shit you see in any dime a dozen 90s sci-fi movie, down to the weird blobby metal stuff. I think the best example of how this hurts the movie is the Jupiter herself. In the original TV series, Jupiter 2 is a flying saucer. It's a little silly, but it's cute. And at first, it looks like the movie's going that way, as when the Jupiter lifts off, it does look like a flying saucer. But that turns out to be an outer protective shell, which then drops away to reveal the ugliest redesign of a starship I've ever seen outside of Star Trek Beyond's rendition of the Enterprise A. Come on, you guys had the chance to modernize the most beautiful starship design in the franchise's history, and this is what you came up with? What also doesn't help this movie is the seriously appalling ADR that is prevalent in some scenes. Sometimes it's just annoying, such as the voice of this guy doing the countdown clearly being in a different room than the one he's actually standing in.
Major West, your escape vector is clear of all traffic. Up is go, on your command.
But then there's the blatantly obvious, such as this moment early in the movie, seconds after Dr. Smith is introduced.
The sedition hired me to provide access to Daniel's apartment, and no more. My work is done.
You can't make this shit up. They clearly changed the line, but couldn't be asked to get Gary Oldman against a green screen to redo it, so they just dubbed it over and hope nobody noticed. Everybody noticed, Steven. Everybody. Hey, speaking of Gary Oldman,
I die, Horatio.
we can't talk about this movie without discussing the acting, because to me, it contains some of the funniest shit in this movie by a long way. Now, it would be very easy for me to go, the acting in this movie sucks, and leave it at that. But I'm not going to. Now, in some cases, there is some bad acting, yes. Lacey Chabert is pretty terrible as Penny Robinson, for example, especially when compared to Mina Sunwall's take on the character in the Netflix series. But having a go at someone for crappy line reads, especially a kid actor, it's low-hanging fruit. It's too easy. For most of everyone else, there's a lot more going on here. Much like the screenplay and the directing, all of the actors seem to have extremely different ideas of what kind of movie they're in. By this, I mean a lot of the actors are taking the movie completely seriously, while two others are very much not. William Hurt is in this movie as John Robinson, and he is playing the role completely straight. The same goes for Mimi Rogers and Heather Graham, who are Maureen and Judy respectively. Their performances are, however, pretty unremarkable. However, firmly in the camp of taking this movie seriously is the man playing Major Don West, Matt LeBlanc. Yeah, Joey from Friends. That guy. The first major question I have here is who the hell cast him?
That was really pretty bad.
As is established by the movie, Major West is the badass, hotshot pilot who kicks names and takes ass. And I don't know about you, but when that sort of character is pitched to me, I just don't think of Matt LeBlanc. He is severely miscast in the role, and it shows from the moment he shows up in the movie. And the funniest bit is, LeBlanc is playing the character completely straight. He seems hell-bent on actually playing the hotshot badass, and it just doesn't work. I almost feel bad for him, really. If he played the character with a lot more comic levity, like the screenplay suggests, it might have actually worked, but he doesn't. So it just becomes hilarious. The only two leads in this movie who seem to know what kind of movie they're in are Jack Johnson as Will Robinson and Gary Oldman as Dr. Smith. I especially want to focus on Oldman's performance because it is also some funny shit. But in Oldman's case, it's clearly on purpose. Unlike everyone else, it seems Oldman read the script and actually realized what he was getting himself into. As a result, he chews the scenery like it's a 3-course meal, delivering a performance that is so over the top, you're left wondering how this is the same man who flawlessly played Jim Gordon for Nolan's Batman trilogy. It works perfectly, both in the spirit the script was written in, and in the spirit of Jonathan Harris's over-the-top performance of Smith in the original TV program.
You bubble-headed booby!
It's entirely possible that, of the leads, he's the only one who actually watched the show. Incidentally, this isn't the only of these 90s movies of 60s show with this quirk of acting. My dad is one of 3 people on the planet who saw the 1998 Avengers film, and he often maintained that Sean Connery was the only actor in that movie who realized how stupid it was, delivering a performance on par with that attitude. Of course, the fact that the actors seem to have different ideas about what movie they're in only leads to more hilarity when they're interacting with one another. Any scene that's between Major West and Dr. Smith is instant comic gold in this respect. This movie is just so much fun, man. Now, this is a sci-fi movie from the late 90s, so because of that, it leans pretty heavily on its effects. Oh boy, CGI from the 90s. I'm sure this aged well. No, it hasn't. Now, this isn't to say that all of the CGI in this movie sucks. From a distance, the metal spiders that permeate the second half of this movie aren't any worse than, say, the replicators from Stargate SG-1. Not perfect, but working well enough for them to be a believable menace for the intrepid Robinson family. The CGI space battle that opens this movie is, not offensively bad given its age. Lots of the effects there are awkwardly implemented, but it's nothing that'll have you screaming, that comes later. The first evidence of real trouble in terms of visual effects comes with this movie's version of Debbie the Blue. That comes in the form of Blarp, a chameleonic alien monkey they just sort of find. Blarp is an entirely CGI character, and not a good one. Now, because I like this movie, I'm tempted to call Blarp endearing, but the fact of the matter is, the CGI bringing her to life sucks. It's not well implemented into the scene, and her animation is clunky enough that even I noticed. I genuinely don't understand why it would have been so hard to just make her a puppet creature and then just ditch the chameleon thing outside of 1 or 2 effects shots. Puppets were and still are effective tools. Yoda was a puppet, Grogu's a puppet. Why not make Debbie into a puppet? Or into a chicken like the Netflix show did. And then there's the monster Spider-Smith that appears towards the end of the movie, which as a kid scared me. I am no longer a kid, and now the only thing that scares me about Spider-Smith is how poorly rendered he is. He is genuinely on the level of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as the Scorpion King in whichever Mummy movie that was in. It's pretty terrible work. It might sound like I'm being really harsh on this movie. After all, it was 1998. Effects do age, after all. But even back when this movie came out, it was getting roasted for this. Roger Ebert himself called the effects in this movie cheesy. So they look stupid then, and they look stupid now. One more thing I want to mention here before I move on to other things about this movie is the soundtrack, because most of it isn't interesting until it suddenly is. The score for this film, much like the directing, is largely unremarkable. It goes through the same motions as any sci-fi action soundtrack and doesn't do anything remotely interesting. It's basically just Bruce Broughton doing paint-by-numbers for most of the movie. And look, it's not like I expect anything groundbreaking from the soundtrack to a Lost in Space movie, but it is a shame nonetheless. It just makes me wish they gotten someone like Jerry Goldsmith in. A sort of Star Trek flair would have definitely given this soundtrack some life. However, musically, this movie redeems itself right at the end, with its rendition of John Williams' iconic theme for the 3rd season of the original series. A breakbeat rendition of a theme from a 60s TV show might sound like a stupid idea, and it kind of is a stupid idea, but Apollo 440 makes it work, delivering a track that goes unreasonably hard. It is the best thing about this movie. Here on in, I will be focusing a lot more on the writing of this movie and how it functions both on its own and as an adaptation of the TV series upon which it is based. Let's start with the basic setup of this movie, because even from a world-building standpoint, this movie is weird. The first major change between the TV series and the movie comes in the form of the backstory for the Robinsons' epic voyage. In the TV series, the setup for why the Robinsons are departing on the Jupiter 2 is pretty bare bones. The planet is overpopulated, humans are spreading out as a result. This is pretty relevant to 60s concerns, as I believe the concept of overpopulation is something that was on the mind of a lot of people at the time. The same goes for Dr. Smith, whose motivation for sabotaging the Robinsons is good old-fashioned international espionage. More importantly though, this setup is simple. We're not going to be spending a lot of time on Earth, so for all storytelling purposes, any setup involving the political state of the planet shouldn't really be that complex. Setting up anything more complex than shit's fucked, it's time to leave is a fatal mistake if it's not going to be important later on. So guess what this movie does? Now, first of all, you know what kind of movie this is going to be when the movie dumps a bunch of exposition on you via narration within 10 seconds. Side note, this narration is also hilarious, as the effort William Hurt puts into it is about on the same level as Harrison Ford's bored narration on the theatrical cut of Blade Runner.
The warring nations of Earth had forgotten their differences and banded together to save our planet. The United Global Space Force was searching the galaxy for worlds rich with drinkable water and breathable air.
This narration also throws a lot of information at you all at once, most of which is not necessary at all. So here's the summary. The world sucks. Climate change, the ozone layer, it's all fucked. Already you can tell this movie was made in the 90s because CFCs and the ozone layer were very topical then. So Earth is packing up and moving to Alpha Prime, but the Robinson family is heading out there first to help build the other side of a Cowboy Bebop style hyperspace gate so people can get to and from the planet faster. This movie goes on to establish that there are people already at Alpha Prime, but they specifically need John Robinson there to help build this other side of this hypergate. Because. Now, already, this is overly complicated for what this movie is. It seems to me that all you really need from that is climate change has destroyed the planet, we're moving to Alpha Prime, the Robinsons are the first family to set out for it. You do not need all this bollocks about a hypergate at all. But the thing about the hypergate gets more convoluted. Stay with me here. So, hyperspace travel exists in the future, but you need 2 hypergates to pass through, otherwise you'll end up anywhere. The movie underlines this several times in the first half an hour. But the thing is, again, you don't need this. Much like in the original TV series, the Jupiter is wildly off course before the hyperdrive is activated anyway. It seems to me that's all you need for them to get lost. They're off course, hyperdrive go noom, and they're even more out in the weeds. All this finagling about the hypergates and all that really only just serves to pad out the runtime on Earth more. And the funniest bit is, the movie goes back on the whole thing anyway at the end. Because at the end of the movie, it's heavily implied they're able to just hyperdrive to Alpha Prime anyway because they got the coordinates for it from the computer banks of another spaceship. So all this bollocks about the hypergate is not only convoluted, it also doesn't matter. Both in terms of setup and in terms of this movie following through on it. Oh, but I'm not done with the setup of this movie. There's more. In the original series, all the setup we get on Dr. Smith is that he works for an unknown foreign power who want to sabotage the Jupiter mission so they can stake claim over Alpha Centauri before the Americans do. Pretty run-of-the-mill Cold War space race stuff, but again, it's all you really need to get the show going. But in the movie, he works for a terrorist organization called the Global Sedition. See, the Global Sedition want to stop the world government's plans to build a hypergate to Alpha Prime because they want to build their own and get there first. I'm sorry, what's the plan here? See, the idea of getting it first makes sense in terms of international espionage in the original TV series, but when it's a small terrorist group versus the entire planet, the plan makes a hell of a lot less sense. When I was rewatching it, my initial memory was that the Sedition just didn't want anyone leaving the planet at all, but then they said the thing about the Sedition's hypergate and it just made less sense. If the Sedition had just remained a foreign power like Russia or something, it would have actually worked. Also, the Sedition used mutant fighters to do their dirty work. That comes up once and then never again. Because of course it doesn't. Why would it? Why specify that at all?
Wait a minute! Who are you?
I won't spend as much time on the character work in this movie, but that's not out of any mercy towards the movie. It's simply because there isn't any character work to speak of. Now, some of the characters I unironically like, and Dr. Smith is definitely one of those. Now, in all technical measures, Smith is a ridiculous villain. He is over the top, manipulative but not even very good at it, and completely self-aware of how evil he is. In most other screenplays, this would be a sign of laziness, but here it's clearly deliberate. As I said earlier, Dr. Smith in the original show is a gloriously over-the-top villain. So in many ways, the way he's written in this movie is an almost one-to-one translation of the character from the show into cinema form. Does this make for an utterly ludicrous character? Of course it does. But the result is that he's the most fun character in this movie. Oldman's grasp of the character just makes him even better. Unfortunately, none of the other characters are written in the same campy spirit, with the possible exception of the robot and Will Robinson. Will is very much the stock kid genius character, but it does work in this case. And the robot is brought to life once again by Dick Tufeld, his voice actor in the 60s show, so that makes for a certain amount of charm. But the rest of them, nowhere near as fun. John and Maureen Robinson have absolutely no discernible personality outside of John being stoic and distant from his family, and Maureen being a mother, I guess? Oh, never mind, they also have some marital tension that never really seems to go anywhere. You know, the usual shit, John's never around, Maureen's tired of it. Might have actually been something if it had been developed like it is in the Netflix series, but not here. Also, this movie seems to forget that Maureen also has a doctorate, as she spends most of the movie not doing anything at all. Running down the cast a little, Judy just says science shit and pretends that she doesn't find Major West attractive. The Major is every badass hotshot pilot cliche in the book, which again might have worked if Matt LeBlanc was self-aware about what kind of movie he's in. And Penny is the worst character in this movie. And this isn't just because Lacey Chabert can't act, it's because she is every annoying teenage cliche from the 90s you can think of. You know, hates her parents, is edgy, writes in her diary, and is in love with boys in a way that makes it wholly clear that a man was writing her.
Could he be cuter?
The appalling teenage girl writing is, for me anyway, most obvious in her relationship with her little brother. It's very much in the vein of Hollywood's inability to write siblings at large, with a dash of bad teenage tropes from the 90s. It's pretty terrible. I mean, to Jack Johnson's credit, he manages to sell his sides of the conversations well enough, but Chabert, not so much. It's especially frustrating because later adaptations have served Penny so much better than this. Mina Sunwell's take on the character is actually the most entertaining character in the Netflix series. So going from that version of Penny to this one is a massive downgrade. Side note, by the way, I know that Penny Vision is supposed to be her diary, but it just looks so much like modern YouTube vlogs that I had to mention the similarity. Who would have known that a movie as daft as this would predict something like that? And yeah, that's about all I have to say about the characters. They're so paper thin.
What the hell happened here?
So let's get into the events of this movie, shall we? The funny thing about this movie structurally is that it doesn't start completely insane. I mean, sure, you have mutant terrorist fighters trying to blow up a hyperspace gate to stop humanity from escaping climate change, but the first act of this movie mostly follows the idea of the original Lost in Space pilot pretty closely. It's only after that that shit gets really weird. So the movie begins with the space battle at the Hypergate, where Major West shows off what a badass he is and shoots some bad guys. Reasonably quickly, this movie introduces one of the funniest through lines in the screenplay, that being Major West's badass one-liners. That's in quotations, by the way, because not only does Matt LeBlanc's attempt at reading them in a badass voice leave you completely unconvinced, but the lines themselves are wholly and utterly ridiculous.
Okay, last one to kill a bad guy buys the beer. Showtime.
But again, they seem deliberately over the top. If LeBlanc had been in on the joke and read these lines with a little more intentional comic levity, maybe this would have worked the way Goldsman intended them to. But instead, we have the comedy of Joey taking himself way too seriously, reading the dumbest lines known to man. It's pretty great, actually. So anyway, after our dumb shoot-'em-up moment, it's time to be introduced to the Robinsons. This time in their family home, as opposed to on the show where we meet them as they're boarding the Jupiter. Here, Will is getting in trouble for using his kid genius brain to cause hijinks at school, as explained to us by the principal of his school, who is talking to Maureen by hologram. Largely unremarkable stuff, except for the reference to Will building a precursor to a time machine for his science fair, which is inexplicably foreshadowing, and the fact that the principal is played by one June Lockhart. More Maureen Robinson in the original TV show. Nice little cameo that. Now we cut over to some kind of press conference with John Robinson, which seems to be this movie's way of exposition dumping what exactly the Jupiter mission is and how the Robinsons will be getting there. Not much of note really happens here, except for 3 more of the original cast showing up. Marta Kirsten and Angela Cartwright, who played Judy and Penny respectively, show up as reporters, and Mark Goddard, who played Major West, shows up as the general overseeing the Jupiter mission. It's a small touch, but I do like that the original cast got to have these little roles. It is, however, the source of the biggest missed opportunity in the entire film, but we'll wrap back around to that when it becomes relevant again. This scene also sets up how Major West joins the mission. As I mentioned earlier, a pilot named Daniels was originally going to fly the mission, but was killed by the sedition, by Smith specifically, as it would turn out. However, the Jupiter mission elected not to mention this, instead telling the press that Daniels had the flu. That seems like a weak cover story, doesn't it? Eventually, you'll have to say the guy died. Why not just say he got killed in a training exercise or something? That's the standard bullshit, isn't it?
It's not that simple. An unfortunate training exercise.
None of this is in any way relevant to the plot of the movie. I am spending all too much time on this. So yeah, Daniels is dead, so Major West gets drafted into the mission, and doesn't seem to get a choice in the matter either. Sucks to be him, I guess. So now it's time to introduce Dr. Smith, which is done with the exact amount of tact you're probably expecting from this movie.
Where is my money?
He then quickly tells the audience he killed Daniels before demanding more money to sabotage the Robinsons as well.
And I'm afraid that my price has just become astronomical.
It is now time to introduce the Major West Judy love story into this movie, which is done in the most awkward way possible. West hits on Judy in front of John, tells John he wants to hit that, and only then realizes that he's John's daughter. What? Putting aside how awkward and cringy all this is, this shouldn't even be possible. Right? The Robinsons have been all over the news for ages by this point. There's no way West hasn't seen Judy in the news as a member of the Robinson family. And putting all that aside, ew? See, this is a major question mark I have about West and Judy in every version of Lost in Space. What's the age gap here? Because in most versions of Lost in Space, Judy, despite also having a doctorate, isn't any older than 20. I'm assuming that's the case here too. I'm not suggesting West is doing anything illegal, but this is weird, isn't it? Incidentally, this love story is barely worth mentioning here on in. They meet in an awkward way, and throughout the movie, West flirts with Judy and she acts completely disinterested. It's the 90s, you know how this ends, moving on. So anyway, after all that and some meaningless family drama between John and Maureen, we get to watch Smith sabotage the robot to destroy the Robinsons, just like he does in the TV series. However, the method by way he gets stuck on the Jupiter is different here. See, in the TV show, Smith gets stuck on board because he's an idiot and can't work the ejector seat that would have gotten him off the Jupiter. But here, it actually approaches being a good story beat. The Sedition decides it would be safer to kill Smith rather than to pay him for his services, so they use his comm device to electrocute him. Smith is able to remove the device, but not before passing out in the ducts of the Jupiter. The movie goes on to not explain why he wasn't found in any pre-launch checks, but overall I think this is the most effective change between TV and film. I like it. So from here on in, the movie follows the first episode of the TV series reasonably closely. The Jupiter launches, the robot comes to life and smashes them up a bit, they go into hyperdrive and get lost. Not much to report here, save for the fact that the whammy line of them being lost is given to the worst actor of the movie.
We're lost. Aren't we?
Why not give it to Will? Also, the hyperdrive jump itself actually succeeds in being kinda cool. The effects used to bring it to life have aged, but it's still effective somehow. I quite like it. But as I said earlier, this movie starts off pretty normal. Once they're lost in space, it loses its goddamned mind. See, here's the thing about the second half of this movie. Akiva Goldsman seems to be a fan of the original show. Many of the events here on in are vaguely based on episodes of the show. The Robinsons finding an abandoned ship calls back to the second episode, The Derelict. The idea of time traveling back to the beginning of the mission seems to be pulled from the season 3 episode Time Merchant. However, the application of these ideas is a level of insane that defies description. I mean, it's the 90s and this is written by the guy who wrote Batman and Robin, so I think that'll give you a good idea as to what direction we're heading in. So first up, we have our reference to The Derelict, as the Robinson family stumble on a derelict human spaceship, one that is docked with an alien one.
If this is all a dream, why can't there be more girls?
The situation is screaming danger, so obviously they not only board the human ship, but also bring Dr. Smith along with them. You know, the guy who nearly killed all of them moments ago? That guy?
The air is stale, old.
That's the smell of ghosts.
What? It very quickly turns out that this ship is from the future, and it was sent on a mission to rescue the Robinsons before tragedy struck on board. They run into possible life forms, which Smith warns them to be wary of.
Oh, trust me, Major. Evil knows evil.
Oh, and I forgot to mention that they brought the robot with them, which is now being remote controlled by Will, leading to Dick Tufeld getting to read lines like,
Just get the hell out of there.
It's pretty fun, really. Anyway, so now we meet Blarp, seconds after which the replicators from Stargate show up to eat the Robinsons for lunch. What follows this is a largely meaningless running shootout with the spiders in which Smith gets bitten by one, that's relevant, which culminates in Major West suiting up in an Iron Man mask to shoot the shit out of these things. And I have to be honest, this mask he pulls up is pretty damn badass. Like, the suit up sequence is really cool, and the design is pretty metal. It is entirely too badass to be in a movie as silly as this one. The Robinsons all make it back to the Jupiter, but in the kerfuffle, the robot dies. And I'm left wondering why anybody on board is sad about it. Like, this is the machine that nearly killed them all, what, half an hour ago? Why would they be anything more than ambivalent about it? Oh well, don't think about that. The spiders are coming at them through space.
They fly now!
West recklessly blows up the derelict spaceship, which incinerates the spiders and forces the Jupiter to crash land on the planet below. At this point, the pacing of the movie takes a very sudden and very dramatic hit. The movie had been moving at light speed from set piece to set piece, but now we get to sit for 10 minutes and watch what I'll generously refer to as character development, and slowly approach wishing something would blow up just to break the monotony. I assume the intention was to capture the sort of stranded on an alien planet thing that the first two seasons of Lost in Space were going for, but it doesn't work. All we get in that respect is a reference to the pod and chariot, which we will never see in the movie because the studio didn't want to pay for props for those things. Sucks for us, I guess. So after 10 years of the characters trying in vain to develop into actual people, the movie remembers that the time bubbles that had the Jupiter meet the future ship are a thing, as they find one on the surface of the planet. Will tries to tell them that they're the result of someone trying to build a time machine, because he knows this from trying to build one for his science fair, but of course the movie needs to play this out, so nobody listens to him. Instead, John and the Major decide to wander into the bubble to see what's what, but not before John gives Will his dog tags as a promise that he'll return. That one's gonna come back in 5 minutes.
I love you, wife.
Will ends up rebuilding the robot, which now has the same head as the original robot from the TV series. That's kinda cute.
Mom always said I should try to make new friends.
Alright, that was pretty funny. The movie quickly finds a way to get the classic Danger Will Robinson danger in, and Will decides it would be very clever to pay a little visit to Dr. Smith, who's been locked up again after the shenanigans on the future ship. Smith manages to convince Will to let him out, and the two of them follow John and the Major into the time bubble, leaving only Maureen, Judy, and Penny back at the Jupiter. That's coming back in a big way in about 30 seconds. So, let me just bottom line the big revelation that happens here. John and the Major are captured in the time bubble and taken to a future version of the Jupiter that is left rotting on the planet. The person who captured them? Will Robinson from the future. See, what happened is in the future Will's past, John and the Major went missing, leaving Smith and the Robinsons alone as the spiders from the ship come back. In this alternate timeline, the spiders ate Maureen, Judy, and Penny, leaving Will alone with Smith and the robot for 20 years. All this time, he's been building a time machine so he can go back to the launch of the Jupiter, so he can stop it and save his family. Are you still with me? Because it's about to get even weirder. Remember how Smith was bitten by a spider? Well, because of that, he turned into one. So alternate Will's been raised most of his life by an insane spider-human hybrid. His true motive turns out not to be to let alternate Will stop the launch of the Jupiter, but to wait until Will's finished the time machine, then go back in time to populate Earth with his spider babies. Because he has an egg sac filled with spider babies. Yeah, I told you this movie goes off the rails. But it's also here that this movie has its biggest missed opportunity. Remember how I said the cast of the original show had little roles across the first act? Well, this would have been a golden opportunity to have Billy Mumy play older Will Robinson. In fact, Mumy actually asked to read for the part. However, someone in the studio declined, saying this would be too confusing. Then, in their infinite wisdom, they offered him an alternate, smaller cameo. Mumy, pretty understandably, decided he wasn't interested anymore and declined. This is the dumbest mistake in the entire film. I hope whoever made that call is embarrassed.
Oh shit.
A boy of your intelligence should never swear. Oh shit.
Indeed.
I don't have a reason for including that exchange. I just think it's really funny. Having reached peak insanity, this movie doesn't really have anywhere else to go. So Spider-Smith is hastily killed off by John using a piece of knowledge Will noticed about the spiders when they first ran into them.
Ew, they eat their wounded.
Back in the present, the Major makes it back to the Jupiter with Will and a future version of the robot, and he tries to take off as the time machine's time bubbles rip the planet apart under them. However, in the commotion, the Jupiter is struck by a large boulder, killing everyone on board. If you feel nothing at this point, that's okay, because of course, alternate Will programs his time machine for 2 minutes before they launch, so John can stop their launch and change its outcome. This is pretty much exactly the same thing as the activation of the Omega-13 in Galaxy Quest in terms of something bad happening and then instantly being reversed. Actually, it's worse. Remember when Chewbacca got blown up in The Rise of Skywalker and then was alive in the next scene? It feels like that. Also, just a side note. So, they bring the robot from the alternate future aboard the Jupiter. So, what happens to the robot in the present that Will hasn't even finished building yet? Does he get abandoned? I feel like that should have been thought through a little. So anyway, the Jupiter crew is all reunited, and they escape the collapsing planet with seconds to spare. However, the planet becomes a black hole because, this causes the crew of the Jupiter to activate the hyperdrive again, now with the coordinates for Alpha Prime programmed in. Will they make it to Alpha Prime? Will they have more hijinks and adventures? The correct answer is nobody cares, at least the movie is over. I once again feel the need to point out that John explicitly stated in the beginning of the movie that it's impossible to navigate hyperspace without a hypergate, but everyone in the movie seems convinced that these coordinates will work without one. If they're still lost after this, that's their own damn fault. This is, on every objective level, a very, very stupid movie. It seems that everybody involved had a completely different idea as to what it was supposed to be, and as a result, it falls flat on its face before it even has a chance to get going. But once again, I love it. And you might be wondering, after all I've said against it, why? Why do I love this movie as much as I do? Is it the nostalgia of watching it over and over as a kid? Is it just because it's fun without having to be anything else? Is it because of how ridiculous it is? Truth be told, I don't think I have any real reason why I love this movie. By all my criteria I usually look at movies through, I probably shouldn't, but I just do. And in a way, that adds to my love for this movie. While most of the time I enjoy looking at movies critically, as I have with this one in this video, sometimes it's just fun to be entertained by a movie. And for all this movie's absurdities, it is vastly entertaining. Alongside all the good movies in the world, we need movies like this one. Movies that are ridiculous and occasionally very, very stupid. Life's too short to take yourself seriously all the time. So put on a dumb movie like Lost in Space. Don't think about it. Just enjoy it.